The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 877, coming to you on Monday the 25th of September 2017. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic planning for natural disasters. But brief preliminary comments. Firstly, as usual, condolences go out to those families which have suffered recent bereavements. And secondly, let me remind you that the criminal assizes will be open tomorrow morning at the courthouse in Kingston. And with that, let me get straight into the topic, because I will be reading 3 articles, or as much of the 3 as I can, from the Searchlight newspaper of last Friday, which are all on the subject of planning for natural disasters. Firstly, the editorial, and then there is an article by Dr. Adrian Fraser called Nature Speaks, and finally an article by my good friend and brother, Mr. Renwick Rose, called Hurricanes, Collective Responsibility, Shared Effort. All in the same theme. And I am pleased to support that theme and to reinforce the call for a sort of national dialogue on the question of preparing for natural disasters, particularly hurricanes. Of course, in addition to that, we always have the threat of La Soufrière volcano, and the Eastern Caribbean has the latent threat of earthquakes. So natural disasters are things that we ought to develop some plans for, not just physically plans as to how to rebuild and so on, but attitudinal plans. But let me begin by reading you the editorial in last Friday's Searchlight. How does one begin to plan for a Category 5 hurricane? The editor of the Searchlight writes, quote, "Our vocabulary has become strained in trying to describe the scale of destruction in the Caribbean in the wake of successive Category 5 hurricanes. Across too many of our islands, we have been made prostrate against this force of nature. Death, destruction, and despair surround us. As we express sympathy and try to stretch our meager resources to extend help, it is our hope that here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines we have started to craft plans on the individual, family, community, business, and national levels to survive a Category 5 hurricane in the not improbable likelihood that one arrives here. Our grim reality is that in the face of the monster hurricanes that we have been experiencing recently, we can only plan to survive and mitigate loss, for there is little room for preventing destruction. The whole host of factors involved, direction and velocity of wind, the rate of travel of the storm, the volume of water deposited by the storm, our topography, even time of landfall of hurricane, day or night, all make for a very unpredictable situation. We can well accept that, quote, it is what it is, unquote. In other words, those factors are beyond our influence. We can talk much about adhering to building codes, building stronger structures to withstand the monster storms and the like. However, in the short to medium term, we are stuck with what we have now. We must, therefore, address this reality. The editor continues, what should our focus be? When we see roofs of prime ministers' residences, hospitals, national emergency headquarters, and other places once considered safe being sent flying, then clearly identifying possible safe shelters is not only a problem, it is a priority. Accessing the likely resistance of our shelters and critical buildings like hospitals and schools becomes even more necessary. Many of the shelters that we advertise are, frankly, while safer than many of our homes, not much of a safety guarantee in the face of an Irma or Maria. In spite of all we say, very few of us are mentally prepared for surviving catastrophic storms of that ferocity. It is especially a problem for our country, which has been spared the worst of this type of hurricane for over a century. Developing the mindset to even conceptualize ourselves without basic amenities for weeks on end, no electricity, pipe-borne water, telecommunications services, access to medical treatment is itself a challenge. Putting measures in place to deal with such a situation is even more challenging. If by chance there are those who think we are being melodramatic, then we only have to speak to or listen to the story of storm survivors from Barbuda, Anguilla, or Tortola. Even residents of Dominica and Puerto Rico could have, a mere 1 week ago, envisaged their current predicament, that their lives could have been dramatically changed overnight. Getting our priorities right and learning from the experiences of our Caribbean neighbors is key. Our scarce resources, while admittedly inadequate, must nevertheless be employed with efficiently. Our emergency plans must be stripped apart and re-evaluated based on what we have learned from the recent storms. We must step up our community education drives. Most of all, we all must be prepared to make realistic judgments and decisions, both on the personal and national levels. Our survival and the welfare of our nation depend on it. That was the searchlight from last Thursday's editorial, the 22nd September. I now go across the page 9 of Friday's Searchlight, and read you from Dr. Adrian Fraser's article headed Nature Speaks. Excuse me. Dr. Adrian Fraser writes, nature's power displayed over the past 2 weeks should have caused most of us to take stock. I do not believe that we have ever before seen anything of this destructive magnitude in such a short period of time. Imagine in a few hours, Hurricane Maria developed from a Category 2 to a Category 5 hurricane, following immediately another Category 5-1. All our pretense of power, in the end, means little. It really does not take much to show us that power does not reside with us. Nature favors no one. The roof of the residence of Prime Minister Skerritt of Dominica went, and he had to be rescued. A similar thing happened with the roof of his top legal advisor, Anthony Astafan. As we prepared our packages to be sent to Tortola, it should have dawned on us that we are one people. We sing our anthems and proclaim loudly our independence, but what does this really mean? We cannot, however, downplay the inequalities and the divisions that exist. Repairing the roofs of Skerritt and Astafan is no big thing for them, but not so for many others. This is the reality of the world we inhabit and shape. Some persons might have made contributions because they had relatives in Tortola or other affected countries. But even with this, the issue of being one people would have emerged, another dimension, but even more. Of Stalin's quote, "We came in the same boat," unquote. We may not all have come in the same boat, but we are bonded as a Vincentian and Caribbean community. Dr. Fraser continues, is this pattern of destruction going to be the way of the future? For some time now, the warning has gone out that man is destroying the planet. This is too simple a way of looking at it, for it is the so-called developed nations who are the greatest polluters that help to create the conditions that lead to such devastation. But not only them. We have little respect for our environment and in so doing create conditions that facilitate this destruction as we upset nature's balance. The Caribbean must be better prepared. I am not sure what has happened with the building code issue. This must be more seriously looked at, since we should be thinking of building structures to withstand Category 5 hurricanes. This is obviously an impossible order for most of us, but overall planning must take this new reality into consideration. There is a lot more at stake, for within a matter of hours, our economies could be destroyed, leaving us defenseless and at the mercy of others. In our countries, we have merely been trying to keep afloat, although we tried to give a different impression. And I will miss out some for reasons of time. Imagine the situation with persons who are relocated to Dominica from Tortola, only to face another hurricane just as devastating as the one that forced them out. To quote Desiderata, unquote, with all its sham drudgery and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful, strive to be happy, unquote. It obviously isn't as easy as this because there are serious obstacles and challenges. Furthermore, we must confront the things for which we fight and create enemies, particularly material things, which could be destroyed in hours, and the worshipping of those whom we believe have power, but instead are helpless when nature speaks. Unquote. Powerful words from Dr. Adrian Fraser. And then on the same page, Renwick Rose, hurricanes, collective responsibility, shared effort. Renwick writes, On the heels of the devastation in Dominica and the ongoing destruction in neighboring islands, we need to continue the dialogue about hurricanes and their impact on all aspects of our lives. This is especially important in light of the frequency with which they keep occurring these days, and more so, the intensity with which they hit us. Whatever the deniers may choose to say, there is now unmistakable evidence that these factors are being influenced by climate change, and that this phenomenon is now a major factor which must be considered in all our environmental, economic, and social plans. It means that climate change must be factored in when drawing up all development plans. This calls for a more scientific approach from us. Yet, how many times, if a hurricane or storm passes us by in relative safety, do we utter the statement that SVG is truly blessed? It is one thing to thank the Almighty for our safety, but when we advance the view that we, as distinct from our neighbors, are particularly blessed, what are we saying? The reality is that we are no more blessed than any of our neighbors. What escapes us affects some other, and vice versa. It is this mistaken reasoning which leads us to the conclusion that when Haiti, for example, suffers disaster after disaster, that it is punishment for its sins. Voodoo, according to some. Some are blessed and others are cursed, is the false conclusion. Another aspect of the hurricane scenario is the after-storm situation, especially in the case of substantial damage. Quite naturally, those most affected, the poorest and most vulnerable in particular, are in dire need of assistance and support. Citizens, charitable organizations, and individuals and external governments and agencies play their part, but the role of the central government is most crucial. This is where we often get confused and feed on the unrealistic expectations. A natural disaster is, in the words of insurance companies and others in the business world, an act of God. We look to governments for support and assistance in rebuilding our lives, but we must be careful how we make demands, and as well be quite clear that we too bear responsibility for our recovery. We too must play our part as best we could and so contribute to the relief effort. When Cross continues, hurricanes and other natural disasters do not only affect us personally, they have a huge impact on all aspects of our lives, including, crucially, our ability to recover. It is not only the particularly affected country which suffers. Take our unique case of the Eastern Caribbean islands. We share a political, economic, and trading space in the OECS and its single market, and even a common currency, the Eastern Caribbean dollar. So, SVG may escape a storm or hurricane, but if there is significant damage to one or more of the OECS states, it affects our collective ability to survive, influences the rate and levels of economic activity in the region, and naturally the capacity to recover. Blessed or not, we are all affected. To give another example, take our flagship airline, Liat. Our aerial lifeline in the Eastern Caribbean. That airline may survive a storm with all its assets intact. But there is more to it. Even when a storm does not hit directly or inflict a large-scale destruction, Liat, out of its abundance of caution and safety of passenger and crew, has time and again to cancel many flights. This adds to the losses it already has, but few take that into consideration. Our selfish response is, quote, "Get me to my next destination as soon as you can," unquote. So, concludes Renwick Rose, there is a multiplicity of ways in which we all get affected, and while each sufferer has his or her own problems, we all share collective responsibility for helping to get us out of the predicament. That is why preparedness so as to minimize the damage and thus the cost of relief and recovery is so important. Just as we expect governments and others to come to our rescue, so too we must identify in what way we all can help and do so as one. I'm sorry, time doesn't permit me to go over the page and read you One Love Bassey's contribution called "The Three Storms in a Row," but I commend it to those who would not have read it. So here we have thoughtful presentations by some of our current commentators, observers, thinkers, intellectuals on the situation. Now, where in the case of a Category 5 hurricane, a country is practically destroyed in a few hours, what happens to national sovereignty? The government is reduced to begging, to mobilizing whatever resources are available. And the peculiar situation with our brothers and sisters in the Northern Caribbean is that given the recent destruction of property in the United States of America itself and in Key West, Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, the ability of the United States authorities to give assistance to the non-U.S. territories must surely be compromised. So that we are being told that it will take a long time before these affected islands could be rebuilt. Tourism has disappeared overnight. Agriculture has been damaged and destroyed, even in lush Nature Isle, Dominica. Now, the hurricane season is not yet over, so let us not rejoice here in St. Vincent and Grenadines. We perhaps have been given a respite, and we have been given some time to think and plan. Let us do so wisely. There ought to be a sustained effort by us to discuss, in the light of what we have seen happening elsewhere, how best we can prepare ourselves in case the worst occurs. Of course, we are thankful to Almighty God for continuing to spare us. But as has been articulated, our turn might come one of these days. We hope it doesn't, but one never knows. I would finally urge us here in St. Vincent and Grenadines to continue to do all we can towards the relief efforts. Accounts have been opened at banks and distribution points have been set up to collect various necessities to send to the affected brothers and sisters. Let us do the very best we can, because we never know when it might be our turn. So I want to thank the intellectuals whose articles have formed the subject matter of this program, and hope that we can involve ourselves here in an urgent national dialogue as to what we can do a little better in St. Vincent and Grenadines, just in case. That is all from this edition of The Law and You, program number 877. I look forward to being a further service to you next week, Monday, DV, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Until then, may the good Lord continue to bless us all, and may He assist the affected individuals in all the other islands and territories which have suffered from these hurricanes to date. Good evening.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.